Well, hi everybody. I'm talking to you from my hotel room at the Fort Garry Hotel in Winnipeg, where I'm at a conference on adult and continuing education, which is what I used to do. It's not really my main focus anymore, but still, I'm catching up with everybody and learning more than I ever wanted to know about micro credentials. So we're on to Module 4 now, and I'm kind of surprised that we're a third of the way through already in such a short time. I reading the discussions, I realized some of you are taking more than one course, and I was quite taken aback by that because that's a huge workload all at once. Packing two courses into 6 weeks. So I hope that by opening up the discussion modules, just opening them up, helps you go a little bit better at your own pace for these modules. But these check-ins will still not be open. Well, they won't be recorded, to tell you the truth, until the opening of each module. So if you can, continue without getting a module check-in, God bless you. So now Stephanie, Cami, and I are going to focus our attention on specific discussion groups. So, for example, Stephanie will be responding and just checking to make sure things are going well in groups A, B, and C, and I will do groups D through H. For those of you who haven't decided on a group name, it's not mandatory, but it is kind of fun. So if you have come to some consensus about a group name, please email me and I will make sure to change that label in your discussion groups. So commenting about what I have been seeing in Module 3, you're all very taken with the idea of the 5 myths, and there are a couple that are coming up again and again. The myth of monoculture, for example, a lot of you are talking about that. Manifest destiny is one that's captured you. You talk a lot about the triangle of oppression, and I'm really, really enjoying the stories that you're telling and your sharing of experiences around these kinds of ideas, because experiences in this kind of course or in feminist approaches generally, experiences are content, right? Experiences are knowledge and content. They're not to be dismissed as anecdotal or too subjective. They are what you experience, and they are what has contributed to your identities, and so please share them. They provide lots of insight to everybody. So Module 4, a really interesting module. We're carrying on with the ideas of monoculture, for example, and intersectionality again. And we're we're scaffolding these ideas as we go. We're not just going to look at ideas in one module and then abandon them and go on to a completely new set and abandon those. We're going to keep scaffolding the concepts as we go along. So in Module 4, we're talking about language. Again, another key concept in feminist research and in feminist understanding. And the resources that you're going to look at and the big ideas that you're going to look at provide you a range of kind of fun articles and scholarly articles and a TED Talk about language and power and storytelling. And earlier we talked about how human beings are storytelling animals. That's how we organize and understand and make meaning of our lives. That's how we share those experiences with others. In sharing those experiences, we reconsider them, we reconstruct them. So we undergo some cognitive processes there that give us deeper understanding, that perhaps bring in different points of view than we understand, transform our own perspectives, and so on. Some of those stories become the grand narratives or the master narratives of our culture. Motherhood is a good example of a master narrative. I think I've talked about that before. In my own field, instructional design, grand narratives or master narratives have been developed and have become part of the canon of instructional design theory and practice, but they're very US-centric, because that's where instructional design as a field was born. They're somewhat militaristic because instructional design was born by the military or for military purposes for training, and continues to be very much dominated by what is the largest training organization actually in the world, which is the American military. And it mostly was born and developed by white men who were the people that got their PhDs, their doctoral work paid for, supported by their service in the military, and in the areas of the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s and 60s, even 70s, were basically the majority of graduate students. So these tenets of instructional design were developed there. Some of them include you can develop an optimal blueprint for learning that's learner proof, if you can imagine it, and teacher proof, so teachers can't mess it up. So that it's a science, purely a science, that there, if you just develop the optimal blueprint, people will learn. Of course, it would be white middle class Americans that would learn, rather than people globally, for example. I mean, what I mean is there was no discussion, for instance, of inclusive design or critical design, which is an area that I'm looking at now. So one must tell counter narratives to disrupt those grand narratives. One must say, wait a minute, there's such a thing as a feminist approach to instructional design, and it's a more relational approach, or it's this, or it's this, or it's this, or you can be an intersectional instructional designer. What would that look like? So that really raises the question of truth. And is there any? Is there really any truth? If you're a post-structuralist, like I am, you would say, no, there is no truth. What is true to people is what they make meaning of based on their own stories, their own experience, their own lives. There's nothing objective, really, about that. So you may want to take issue with that. I invite you to do that in the discussions. But I want to tell you some stories about myths and storytelling and so on. And in particular, I want to tell you a story about Ms. So I became, well, language is a good example of language. Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem and co. In the 60s and early 70s really were sort of struggling with how the ideas of feminism could be impactful, right, and could be global. And just naming these experiences or these thoughts as feminism allowed people like me, who was a young teenager, for instance, in the 60s, to be able to identify with something, to be able to identify with a set of ideas that were organized ideas and evolving ideas. In your module, there's the example of Ms. Magazine. Well, I got married in 1975 at 19, can you believe it? I just turned 20 actually when I got married. So, really young. And I was addressing wedding invitations, and my mother was insisting that I follow Emily Post's rules of wedding invitations. So that meant saying, Mr. and Mrs. William John Campbell invite you, to the wedding of blah, blah, blah. But I insisted that I was going to use Ms. on the invitations. We had a huge argument about that, and the compromise, and when I think about this, I'm really kind of embarrassed, but the compromise was that I would address invitations to either people I knew shared the ideas of feminism or were unmarried as Ms. So I was going to address the envelope to Ms. But if they were parents of my generation or my in-laws' generation, they were going to be Mrs. So instead of Mrs., it was Ms. Mrs. with a little bit of kind of overlap. So I'm embarrassed when I think about that, but those were the kinds of things that we were really struggling with in the 60s and the early 70s. How are we going to come to kind of one understanding a woman's personhood without reference to marital status or without reference to a relationship, with a man. My dad was a credit manager at a car sales place, Healy Ford, I think it was at the time, in Edmonton. And he was telling this particular story to my cousin, and they laughed about it. And it just horrified my sisters and I, and made me see my dad much differently. My dad was, he was really great. He was a raconteur, funny guy, man of his generation, though. He unusually preferred the company of women. So he never really liked being in a huddle of men talking sports and one-upping each other and that kind of thing. He just, at my parents' parties, you would always find him in the dining room with women surrounding him, enjoying in company. He always said he enjoyed women's company way more than men. They were smarter and funnier and et cetera, et cetera. So this really horrified me. So he's telling this story. This is what horrified me. He's telling this story to my cousin about a woman that came in to buy a car by herself, and which was not as that usual, I guess, in the 70s. And so they were doing the contract, and he said, so is it Miss or Mrs.? And he's filling out the contract. And she said, it's Doctor. And so he puts down his pen and looks up and says, well, Doctor, is it Miss or Mrs.? And they laughed about that, my dad and my cousin. So, okay, it's just a story for you to sort of consider how things have changed and evolved, and how, even though we started going by Ms., somewhat universally, how that didn't eliminate the, I'm going to call it curiosity, which is a kind way of talking about the curiosity of people about what your marital status was, because that was the thing that was most important. It would tell this car dealership whether or not you had permission to buy the car, that you could pay the monthly fee, the monthly invoice, and so on. So, anyways. So was there a couple of stories I wanted to share with you? I have to say I was very, very taken by the TED Talk, the Adichie TED Talk. And as she was talking, reminded me again and again of monoculture, and how there are dominant cultures that really create the narratives in our lives. And unless we have something to counter that, some narrative to counter that, those are the stories that we will believe and that will shape us. But remember that we can tell our own stories. And by telling those stories, we can shape culture and society as well. So have fun with this module. I hope you enjoy the module and the discussions. The challenge assignments are starting to come in. Remember, you need to do 2 in total, but they have to be from different modules. And some of you are writing and saying, well, can I write a poem that's written? You don't want anything written. What I don't want is a scholarly essay. So, and a lot of you are used to doing that always for evaluation. We don't want that. We want some creativity and innovation. So people have suggested, could I do something that relates to social media? Could I write a poem? Could I do some digital storytelling? Like, so many things are on the table. And as they start to come in with your permission, I will share some of them with others so that they can see what the range of possibilities are. So again, thank you very much for your engagement, and have lots of fun with this module.